But to debate cultural censorship now, I'm joined by Dominique Samuels. She is president of the Orthodox Conservatives Group, and Eleanor Penny, the journalist and commentator. Eleanor, lovely to have you on the show. Do you think it's right for these classic movies and TV shows to be taken off services where they are widely available because they might have views or depictions that in 2020 feel a little bit off colour? Don't you actually think it would be much better for them to exist as historic artefacts, and then individuals can make their own judgment and also see how far we've come?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right that this is a moment where we need to be having not just a simple binary questions about whether or not it's allowed, because frankly censorship is not what's going on here. You can still access these kinds of materials on, whatever platform you want. Basically, this is the internet we're talking about after all. But what we should be doing is having a conversation where we don't cherry pick the histories which make us feel perhaps more comfortable, where we really step back and take a look at the context that these works were created in. Because, for instance, Gone with the Wind is a groundbreaking piece of cinema, and it is also a key cultural artifact in romanticizing people who were fighting to preserve slavery. And we need to have conversations where both of those can exist at the same time. And freedom of speech is not just about what kind of art gets created, but also about the conversations that we're allowed to have about those pieces of art. And it seems to me very weird and precious and a little regressive to say that, no, we're not allowed to critique and evolve as a culture in the way that we think about these pieces of art as history is evolving.
Dominique Samuels, you are a black woman. Do you think Gone with the Wind should be removed? Do you think Little Britain should have been pulled off Netflix and the BBC iPlayer?
Well, no, quite frankly. And I think it's kind of patronising in the sense that it suggests that black people kind of can't take a joke. And I've spoken to many black and brown people who actually find Little Britain hilarious. And I think that everybody is being a little too sensitive. As I've said before, comedy isn't supposed to be politically correct. And I find it interesting that a lot of people are saying that this isn't a freedom of speech issue, that this isn't a censorship issue, when it quite literally is. It started off with what happened to George Floyd, which actually has nothing to do with Little Britain. It's gone on to then wanting to tear down statues, and now we have private streaming platforms wanting to tear down shows that other people might find offensive. Now this is censorship because that means that these shows aren't as widely accessible as they otherwise would have been if they would have still been on that platform. So that is a form of censorship. And it also begs a wider question about, comedy and the way that we talk about humour in this country. We should be able to critique things, but, we can't critique things adequately if they're just tore down the minute a small but loud group of people decide that they're too offensive for everybody else. I just think it's really patronising.
Where do you draw the line, though, Dominique? Because, for example, an episode of Fawlty Towers, which I think was late 70s, wasn't it, used the N-word, which feels completely unacceptable to be available on a streaming platform today. Or actually, do you say no, it should exist as it was first broadcast by the BBC?
Well, I think applying this to the context of today, a lot of music stars, including white ones and including non-black ones, do use the N-word in music, and it's bleated out. You could do the same with these kinds of shows.
So just bleep it.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to do that, but at the end of the day, nobody is forcing you to watch these shows. You can either watch them if you find them entertaining or decide not to, because the point is, it's a slippery slope that we go down. Where does this end? It starts off under the pretense that it's defending black people from jokes they may or may not find offensive. And then where does it end? I mean, we've seen this with the transgender debate with comedians like Ricky Gervais. You can't police what people find funny, because a lot of people actually have dark humour, including myself.
Well, indeed. Eleanor Penny, aren't you just patrolling comedy now?
I mean, I am a big fan of vicious comedy, of comedy that doesn't pull its punches, and I think that comedy is a vital part of the conversations that we should be embracing right now at a moment of huge cultural flux. But we need to remember that freedom of speech around comedy is important because comedy has a big role to play.
But you want to
in
take that
shaping our
away.
culture.
You want to take that away.
No, of
You
course
want
I
Little
don't.
Britain banned.
That's completely ludicrous. I don't want Little Britain banned.
Well, you don't want it on
Neither does the
Netflix, do
BBC.
you?
Actually, I never said that either way. I'm not really that bothered either way about whether or not it's on Netflix. What I want to see is more resources and more conversations that allow us to grapple with the history about why a lot of black and ethnic minority people feel that the stereotypes that Little Britain promoted are very harmful and are rooted in a racist and colonial history that we are still dealing with
But Eleanor, is it not? Oh, sorry, Dominique, you go.
Sorry, it's got nothing to do with colonial history. Little Britain took the mick out of everyone. Fat people, thin people, common people, posh people. I mean, look at Vicky Pollard, for example.
Well, exactly. I was just about to say, Eleanor, I'm a gay person. I don't want it to be banned because they had that character who was the only gay in the village. Did I find it particularly humorous? No. But if someone did, great. I just feel like we're creating a culture of oversensitivity. And when you open up this Pandora's box, in fact, what you're going to have is comedians and creatives absolutely terrified to even do satire.
If I may, you seem absolutely committed to the idea that I want to ban things when I've said repeatedly that I don't. And if we're going to
disagree with it then?
If we're going to talk sensitivity here, let's talk about the complete fury that happens whenever someone points out that perhaps cultural common values have evolved, and we need to be having new conversations about what kind of culture. I'd let you finish. Please let me finish. About the cultural artifacts that we once maybe enjoyed en masse. And yes, this is a moment of growth, and of course there are going to be growing pains because sometimes reevaluating things that we once held precious in light of changing history is painful, but that doesn't mean it's not important.
Dominique, your response?
Well, I think it's just a bit contradictory because one minute you're saying that you don't agree with banning things, and then on the next you're saying that we need to revise our cultural history. I don't really understand what your point is. You either agree with streaming platforms removing Little Britain because some people are offended, or you don't. There's plenty of conversation around these kinds of things and how they presented ethnic minorities. There is plenty of it, but what you don't do is remove it because some people find it offensive. And you know what? Some people do find it offensive that are ethnic minorities, but a hell of a lot actually don't and find it pretty funny. We all need to be able to laugh at each other and laugh at ourselves from time to time. And this is why this kind of stuff is so dangerous.
Well, yes, and Eleanor, also, is it not important for us to have a benchmark of how society has changed too? Because I actually find it fascinating when I look back at programs in the 90s that at the time felt very progressive and enlightened and actually now do look a little bit dated. But when I see that, I actually feel happy about how far as a society we've come in a short period of time. And if they are removed so that young people are no longer able to watch them, they have no idea of our history. And I think that is actually, on a serious level, quite dangerous.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you've really hit the nail on the head here because this is about education. And that's why I'm kind of ambivalent about the question of whether or not it's on Netflix, because what we really need to be doing is giving young people especially, but really everyone, more resources to understand the context in which these pieces of art, these pieces of culture were created. And
but what are you proposing? But practically, what are you proposing? That before someone is able to watch an episode of The In-Betweeners, they're going to get a 5-minute historic documentary, putting it into context. Come on, this is entertainment. This is entertainment.
I think you know how ridiculous that sounds because of.
Well, I'm trying to work it out. What do you mean? Well, what do you mean on a practical level then? What do you mean?
I mean, I'm thinking of introducing into our schools, our social media, our cultural conversations more widely, different voices that might have a different perspective on this. And when we talk free speech, we also need to talk about the kind of voices that are uplifted, not just about how we view the past creations, which are often driven and dominated by a handful of largely white voices.